Leonardo Moretti had everything that most people spent their entire lives chasing. At 37, he was one of the most celebrated architects in Florence. Tall, composed, impeccably dressed in linen suits and handcrafted Italian shoes. His firm designed glass towers for the rich and villas for the famous. He had a loft overlooking the Arno River, an Aston Martin in his garage, and a list of awards that filled a wall. But when his mother called one morning to say, "She's gone," he felt nothing, just a hollow echo in the space where something human used to live. She was Nonna Rosa, his grandmother, a woman who had raised him with hands that always smelled of basil and flour, who told stories about how buildings were like people, fragile on the outside, strong at the core if built with love. He hadn't visited her in years. Success had become his religion. Still, duty called. So on a grey February morning, Leonardo drove his sleek car south to the small Tuscan village of Monterossi, where the stone cottage of his childhood stood quiet among olive trees. The air smelled of wet earth and rosemary. Inside, the house looked frozen in time. Lace curtains, chipped porcelain, a clock that had stopped years ago. Dust danced in the sunlight. Leonardo came to oversee the estate sale. A company was scheduled to arrive that afternoon to catalogue everything. His task was to choose what he wanted to keep before strangers reduced his grandmother's life to price tags. He expected grief. Instead, he felt emptiness. He moved through the rooms mechanically. A drawer of old postcards, faded dresses, wooden spoons. It all seemed so small compared to the steel and glass of his current world. Then, in the kitchen, beneath a loose tile by the stove, he found a small wooden chest, no bigger than a shoebox. It was hand-carved with olive branches and an engraving. Per chi ha dimenticato come si ama, for those who have forgotten how to love. Leonardo frowned. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes, each tied with twine, and a note on top written in his grandmother's elegant, slanted script. To my dearest Leonardo, if you are reading this, I am gone, but that doesn't mean I've left. There are 48 letters inside this box, one for each Sunday of the year. Each letter carries a task. You must open one each week and follow the instruction it contains. They will seem strange at first, but by the end, you will understand everything. When the last letter is opened, return here. Something will be waiting for you. Con amore, Nonna Rosa. Leonardo exhaled sharply. He had no time for sentimental games. He had projects to finish, deadlines to meet. Yet something in her handwriting, the way the ink curved at the R, made his throat tighten. Without really deciding to, he opened the first letter. Letter 1. The table of strangers. Find a table where no one expects you. Sit with someone who eats alone. Share bread. Listen more than you speak. He almost laughed. Ridiculous, he muttered. But later that day, as he left the notary's office, he passed a small trattoria near the piazza. Through the window, he saw an elderly man sitting by himself, staring at an untouched bowl of pasta. The scene tugged at something inside him, a faint ache like a forgotten song. Almost without thinking, Leonardo walked in, ordered the same meal, and sat across from the man. The old man looked up, startled. "I'm sorry," Leonardo said softly. "May I share the table? It's the only one free." It wasn't, but the man nodded anyway. They ate in silence until the man spoke. "My wife used to sit here," he said. "Every Sunday. This is our spot. I still come. Habit, I guess." They talked for an hour. About love, about loss, about how food tasted different when you had someone to share it with. When they parted, the man smiled through wet eyes. "Thank you, son. It feels good to be seen again." That night, Leonardo couldn't sleep. Something had shifted, a crack in the armor of indifference he'd built for years. Letter 2. Repair something broken. The next Sunday, he opened the second letter. Inside, his grandmother had written, Fix something that isn't yours, not because you have to, because you can. He looked around the empty house. Everything was old but still standing, except the small fence around the neighboring garden, which had collapsed under winter storms. He grabbed a hammer. Halfway through the repair, a little girl appeared, holding a basket of lemons. "That was my grandmother's fence," she said. "She passed away last year." Leonardo smiled gently. "Then we'll fix it together." Her name was Julia, and she was 8. When they finished, her mother, Anna, came out to thank him. She recognized his last name. "You're Rosa's grandson. She used to bring us soup when my husband was sick. You look just like her when you smile." That comment, "You look like her when you smile," lingered long after he drove back to Florence. Weeks turned into months. Every Sunday he opened a new letter. Each one was simple, almost childlike, yet profoundly precise. Plant something that will outlive you. Apologize to someone without explaining why. Feed someone who cannot repay you. Build something with your hands, not your name. Each task pulled him further from his marble penthouse and closer to the person he used to be. He began spending weekends in Monterossi, restoring his grandmother's house. He cooked terribly at first, but learned. He began to visit the old trattoria often, bringing leftover pasta to the elderly man, Pietro, who had become a friend. He noticed the world again, the scent of baking bread, the laughter of children, the way the sky turned lavender before rain. Letter 21. Forgive your father. Leonardo froze when he read it. He hadn't spoken to his father in 10 years. Their falling out had been brutal, harsh words about ambition, choices, and the emptiness of success. His father still lived in Rome, running a small art restoration shop. After hours of hesitation, Leonardo drove there. His father looked older, smaller somehow. "I found Nonna's letters," Leonardo said. The old man's eyes softened. "She told me about them, said you wouldn't open them until life stopped making sense." They talked all night, about buildings and time, about how both could be repaired if the foundation remained strong. When Leonardo left the next morning, he felt lighter. By letter 30, he had transformed. He'd begun volunteering at a local community center, teaching architecture students how to design low-cost housing for displaced families. He sold his car, choosing instead to take trains. The staff at his firm handled projects without him, and surprisingly, business didn't suffer, but something else grew: peace. Letter 47. The Feast. Invite everyone you've met this year. Feed them under the same roof. This is your test, Leonardo, and your reward. So he did. He cooked for 3 days straight in his grandmother's kitchen. Lasagna, soup, bread, tiramisu, using her old wooden spoons. The table stretched across the courtyard. Julia and her mother, Pietro from the trattoria, the volunteers from the community center, even his father. As candles flickered under the Tuscan stars, laughter filled the night. For the first time in his adult life, Leonardo wasn't the architect of structures. He was the architect of belonging. When the guests left, he opened the final envelope. Letter 48. The Gift. If you are reading this, you've remembered how to love. Go to the attic. In the attic, he found a rolled-up blueprint, old, yellowed, drawn by hand. Across the top it read, Casa delle Mani Calde, the House of Warm Hands. It was a design for a community kitchen and art school, blending architecture, food and learning, a dream project his grandmother had once spoken of when he was a boy. Beneath it was a deed, transferring ownership of the cottage to him. And another note: this house is yours now, but only if you use it for what it was meant for. Connection. Build the house of warm hands. Fill it with those who have forgotten their worth. Feed the lonely. Teach the curious. Heal the world, one shared meal at a time. A year later, the Casa delle Mani Calde opened its doors. Half kitchen, half studio, it became a haven for the forgotten, widows, students, travelers, the broken and the brave. Every Sunday, Leonardo cooked with them, taught design, told stories, and listened. He no longer wore designer suits. He wore aprons. And for the first time, he smiled easily. On the one-year anniversary of the Casa, more than 100 people gathered in the courtyard, sharing dishes made from Rosa's old recipes. Pietro gave a toast. "To Rosa Moretti," he said, raising his glass, "who built more than houses. She built hearts." As twilight deepened, Leonardo found one last letter tucked inside the blueprint tube, smaller than the others. "My darling boy, you have built everything I dreamed for you, but remember, the house is not made of stone. It's made of people. The walls will crumble someday, but kindness never will. So keep building, Leonardo. Not up, but around those who need a place to belong." He pressed the note to his heart, tears glistening as laughter echoed through the courtyard. In that moment, he finally understood. He had spent half his life designing buildings for the world, but the masterpiece he was always meant to create was the life that finally felt like home. The Casa delle Mani Calde had been open for 3 years when the world began to change. What started as one small kitchen in the hills of Monterossi had blossomed into a quiet revolution. Every Sunday, dozens gathered under its terracotta roof, widows kneading bread beside students, refugees learning to cook beside retired chefs, children painting murals while their parents learned to plant herbs. The smell of roasted tomatoes and laughter had replaced the silence that once filled Nonna Rosa's home. But for Leonardo Moretti, now 40, peace had become complicated. Success, the kind he'd abandoned years ago, was finding him again, this time disguised as goodness. International magazines wrote about the architect who traded towers for tables. Tourists came to take photos. Philanthropists offered money to expand the Casa across Europe. At first, Leonardo said yes to everything. More kitchens meant more people fed, more lives touched. But with each meeting, each contract, something began to slip. The simplicity, the quiet, the human heart of what Rosa had built. One evening, as dusk settled over Monterossi, Anna, the young widow who had once thanked him for fixing her fence, found him alone, staring at the original blueprint of the Casa. "You look like a man lost in his own creation," she said. Leonardo smiled faintly. "I'm just wondering if I'm building too much again. Nonna used to say that sometimes we hide behind the noise of progress." Anna stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time to listen to the silence again." He looked at her, really looked. In the years since they'd met, Anna had become the soul of the Casa, organizing meals, comforting guests, teaching the children. Her laughter had the same warmth his grandmothers used to have. For a moment, Leonardo wondered if the letters had brought him to her on purpose. The visitor. A month later, a man arrived from Milan, a journalist named Marco Bellini, working on a feature called The New Architects of Humanity. He was charming, curious, and relentless. He followed Leonardo for a week, taking notes, asking questions about the philosophy behind the Casa. On the final day, he asked one that stuck. "Do you ever worry that you've just built another kind of empire, this time made of kindness instead of glass?" Leonardo hesitated. Empires crumble. Communities don't. But that night, the words replayed in his mind until dawn. Was he still chasing validation, just dressed in humility instead of ambition? The fire in early autumn, tragedy struck. An electrical fault in the storage room sparked a fire. By the time help arrived, much of the kitchen was destroyed. The ovens, the long wooden tables, the herbs dried into ash. Leonardo stood in the courtyard watching flames lick the roof tiles his grandmother had once touched. The air smelled not of basil and bread, but smoke and grief. Volunteers cried. Children clung to their mothers. Someone asked, "What now?" For the first time in years, Leonardo didn't have an answer. He spent weeks trying to rebuild, overwhelmed by permits, insurance, and bureaucracy. Money wasn't the problem, motivation was. It felt like the fire had burned through him too. Then one morning, while clearing debris, he found something half buried in the ashes. A small piece of wood, charred but intact. Carved into it were the words, Casa delle Mani Calde, build again. He recognized the handwriting, his grandmother's. It wasn't from the original blueprint, it was new, recent. How? Tears blurred his vision. For the first time, he wondered if maybe Nonna's presence hadn't left at all. He took the carving to Anna. Look, he whispered. She smiled through tears. Then we rebuild, but differently this time. The second foundation. They rebuilt slowly, not with contractors or donations, but with hands, hundreds of them. Old men brought tools, children carried stones, women cooked for volunteers. When it reopened 6 months later, the Casa was smaller, humbler, but more alive than ever. And Leonardo had changed again. He stopped accepting expansion offers. He turned down interviews. Instead, he began traveling quietly across small towns, teaching others how to start their own warm houses, using whatever they had, barns, basements, backyards. He never franchised the idea. He simply shared it. The letters return one winter morning, 3 years after the fire. A package arrived. No return address. Inside was a faded envelope sealed with red wax. The handwriting stopped his heart. My dear Leonardo, you found the first 48 letters I wrote you, but you didn't know there were 50. The last 2 were meant for the man you'd become, not the boy who began. Letter 49. Rest. The world will always ask you for more. Give it less. Give it meaning. Letter 50. Love. You've built homes for hundreds. Now build one for yourself. It's time to stop inheriting my story and start writing your own. Con amore eterno, Rosa. He sat there for a long time, tears dripping onto the page. Build one for yourself, she'd said. Love finds its place. That spring, Leonardo married Anna. Their ceremony was simple, in the courtyard of the Casa, surrounded by everyone who had helped rebuild it. Giulia, now a teenager, baked the cake. Pietro walked Anna down the aisle, and above them hung a banner that read, Where there is love, there is architecture. When the priest asked if he promised to build a life of patience and compassion, Leonardo smiled. I've had the best teacher. Legacy. Years later, after Leonardo's passing, his daughter, Rosa Giulia Moretti, found a single unfinished sketch in her father's notebook. It wasn't a building. It was a table. Around it were drawn people of every kind, young, old, weary, laughing, their hands touching in the middle. Beneath it, in his handwriting, the real foundation of any house is love shared at its table.